The crisp morning air carried a faint scent of damp earth and freshly cut grass as Officers Doyle and Rivera pulled up to the Bishop residence in their patrol car. The neighborhood was an older one, its streets lined with towering oak trees that cast long shadows in the early sunlight. The houses were modest yet well-maintained, exuding a quiet suburban charm. Officer Doyle, a seasoned veteran with salt-and-pepper hair and a perpetual frown, glanced at his younger partner. "Routine call. Nothing special. Probably just a neighbor dispute." Rivera, fresh out of the academy, nodded but remained alert. He had learned quickly that even the most mundane calls could take unexpected turns. Stepping out of the car, they were immediately greeted by a flustered woman in a floral dress, Karen Moore, the neighbor who had placed the complaint. "Officers! Thank goodness you're here," Karen exclaimed, pointing toward the driveway that separated her home from Mr. Bishop's property. "He's blocked off the road again. This is a community road, and we need access." Doyle sighed, approaching the alleged blockade. A simple wooden fence with a locked gate stretched across the entrance of what appeared to be a private driveway. Mr. Bishop, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and an air of quiet intensity, emerged from his front porch, arms crossed over his chest. "That's my property," Bishop stated firmly. "I have the documents to prove it." Karen let out an exasperated breath. "This road has been open for years. We all use it to get in and out. Now he's decided to claim it as his own. That's absurd." Officer Rivera took out a notepad, jotting down details. "Mr. Bishop, can you show us those documents?" With an irritated nod, Bishop disappeared into his house and returned moments later with a thick folder. He handed it to Doyle, who flipped through the paperwork. Deeds, land surveys, and legal records, all in order. "Everything checks out," Doyle confirmed, handing the papers back. "This is private property." Karen's face flushed red. "Then what about the emergency? What if there's a fire or a medical situation? This road is essential." Bishop's jaw tightened. "That's not my problem. There's a public road not even 50 feet away. You all just liked using my driveway as a shortcut." Rivera glanced between them. "Mr. Bishop, when did you put up the fence?" "A few days ago," Bishop replied. "After I found something buried on my property. Something strange." Doyle raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" Bishop hesitated, then gestured for them to follow him toward the backyard. The officers exchanged a glance before walking behind the house, where a large hole had been dug near the tree line. Nearby, a pile of dirt stood next to a heavy tarp partially covering something solid and gray. Bishop pulled the tarp aside, revealing a thick slab of concrete embedded in the ground. The material was old, weathered, and bore faint, illegible markings. Doyle crouched down, running a hand over the rough surface. "What exactly is this?" Rivera asked. "That's what I'd like to know," Bishop said. "I was digging to plant a new tree when my shovel hit something hard. I thought it was just an old foundation, but the more I uncovered, the stranger it got. The concrete is reinforced far beyond standard construction. And it's not just a slab, it extends deeper. It's part of something bigger." Doyle stood up, brushing dirt from his hands. "And you put up the fence because of this?" Bishop nodded. "The night after I started digging, I caught two men poking around my property. They were dressed in dark clothes, moving carefully, like they knew exactly what they were looking for." Rivera frowned. "Did you get a look at them? Any identifying features?" "Too dark," Bishop admitted. "But I have security cameras." He led them to his back porch, where a small monitor displayed grainy black and white footage. The video, time-stamped just past 2 a.m., showed two figures entering the backyard. They moved with precision, their faces obscured by hoods. One carried what appeared to be a small device, scanning the area where the digging had occurred. The other approached the fence and reached into a bag, retrieving something metallic. "They clipped my lock," Bishop said grimly. "But they replaced it with another one, identical to mine. I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't checked." Rivera and Doyle exchanged looks. This was no ordinary trespassing. "Did they take anything?" Rivera asked. "Not that I can tell," Bishop replied. "But they were looking for something, and I don't think they found it." Doyle folded his arms. Why not call us sooner? Bishop exhaled. Because I don't know what I'm dealing with. And neither do you. As if on cue, Karen, who had been eavesdropping from a distance, approached again, her expression uneasy. You don't know what you're getting into, she warned. Bishop's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Karen hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. Just be careful. People don't dig around here for a reason. Doyle turned to her. If you know something, now's the time to say it. Karen bit her lip. I've lived here my whole life. My grandparents lived here before me. There are stories about things buried under this neighborhood. Military things. Cold War things. We used to hear strange noises at night when we were kids. And sometimes, people disappeared. A cold silence settled over the group. Rivera tapped his notepad. Disappeared how? Karen shrugged. A couple of kids back in the 80s. A construction worker in the 90s. The official stories were accidents, runaway kids. But people around here, we don't believe that. Bishop looked back at the slab of concrete. Then whatever's down there isn't just an old bunker. Doyle sighed, rubbing his temples. All right, Bishop. You want us to look into this, we will. But I suggest you stay inside, keep your cameras rolling, and don't go digging any deeper. Bishop stared at the officers for a long moment before nodding. But deep down, he knew the warning wouldn't stop him. Something was buried under his land, something important. And he wasn't going to let it stay hidden. Rivera and I stayed inside, watching the security footage again. The SUV circled for the fourth time, confirming that whoever was watching had escalated their surveillance. Karen's unexpected visit added another layer of unease. She had always been a nuisance, but now she was scared, genuinely afraid. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. You don't understand what you're messing with. People disappear over this kind of thing. I exchanged a glance with Rivera. What do you know? Karen hesitated before stepping further inside, as if being seen talking to us would put her in danger. It's not just a tunnel. There's something down there. My grandfather told me stories about this place when I was a kid, before the neighborhood was built. People in town always said there was an old military project here, but it was hush-hush. No one knew who ran it, but when the war ended, they buried it. I swallowed hard. Who buried it? The U.S. military. Karen shook her head. No. My grandfather said it wasn't ours to begin with. It was theirs, the Russians. A heavy silence settled over the room. Rivera rubbed his jaw, processing what she had just said. If that's true, then whatever is down there is classified beyond anything we should be touching. And yet, here we are, I muttered. We had to see it for ourselves. We covered our tracks, making sure we weren't followed as we slipped out the back and toward the excavation site. Karen refused to go near it, but Rivera and I pressed on. The moment we pulled back the tarp, the chill in the air was undeniable. The surface of the concrete slab was unnaturally cold, even under the morning sun. Rivera traced the old Soviet markings, his fingers pressing into the grooves of a faded emblem. This shouldn't be here. If this was a Cold War project, the government should have known. But if they did, they sure as hell didn't tell anyone. I grabbed the crowbar, wedging it into the seam where I had partially uncovered the structure. With a sharp grunt, I pried upward. A hiss of air escaped as something shifted beneath, a mechanism releasing decades of sealed pressure. Then, for the first time, we heard it, a metallic groan, followed by a deep, echoing sound from below. It wasn't just a slab. It was a door. Rivera shot me a warning look. We shouldn't go in unprepared. You think we have time to wait? I countered. He exhaled sharply but nodded. We worked together to lift the heavy panel, revealing a dark stairwell descending into the earth. A rush of stale air hit us, carrying with it the scent of rust and something else, something unnatural. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating old, corroded walls lined with strange machinery. Rivera followed, his hand hovering over his holster. The further we descended, the stronger the feeling of being watched grew. Then we saw it, an old sign, barely legible under layers of dust and grime. The Cyrillic letters stood out starkly against the metal, 12, Object 12. My stomach turned. This was never just a bunker. Deeper inside, the air grew colder. The passageway opened into what looked like an abandoned research facility. Rows of metal lockers lined the walls, their doors rusted shut. Computers, old and outdated, sat covered in dust, their monitors shattered. But what caught our attention was the large containment chamber in the center of the room. It was intact. Rivera ran a hand over the thick glass. This wasn't meant to be abandoned. It was sealed. Whatever they were doing here, they didn't want anyone to find it. Karen's words echoed in my head. People disappear over this kind of thing. I wiped away some of the dust, revealing something even worse, handprints on the inside of the glass. Someone, or something, had been inside. And it had tried to get out. A sudden noise shattered the silence, a clatter from deeper in the facility. Rivera drew his gun instantly, his eyes locking onto the darkened hallway ahead. We're not alone. The rational part of me wanted to believe it was just debris settling, but my gut screamed otherwise. Slowly, cautiously, we moved forward. My flashlight flickered as we neared the next chamber. The door was ajar, hanging off its rusted hinges, leading into a vast, dimly lit room. Then we saw them, shadows moving against the walls, shifting unnaturally. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise as a low, distorted whisper filled the air. The security footage. The SUVs. The secrecy. It all made sense now. We had uncovered something we were never meant to find. Rivera's voice was barely a breath. We need to get out. Now. But I already knew it was too late. Rivera and I pressed deeper into the hidden structure, our flashlights slicing through the darkness. The air was thick with dust, carrying the scent of something long forgotten. Karen hesitated at the threshold, torn between curiosity and fear, but the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridor left her with little choice. We moved cautiously, our footsteps muffled by the dirt-covered concrete floor. The walls were lined with rusted metal panels, some bearing faded Cyrillic writing, further confirming Rivera's suspicion. This was a Soviet installation, buried and abandoned, or perhaps deliberately concealed. My pulse pounded as I ran my fingers over one of the panels, brushing away decades of grime to reveal a symbol, a hammer and sickle crossed over what looked like an atom. This wasn't just any bunker. It was something far more dangerous. Karen shivered. "We need to go," she whispered, but I shook my head. "Not yet." I reached for the nearest control panel, a corroded mess of buttons and dials. The footsteps in the distance grew closer, but I focused on the present. What was this place meant for? And more importantly, why had someone gone through so much trouble to bury it? Rivera pointed toward a heavy metal door at the far end of the corridor, slightly ajar. A cold draft seeped through the opening. "Looks like our answer is through there." Before we could take another step, my phone vibrated violently in my pocket. I pulled it out to see a blocked number flashing across the screen. Against my better judgment, I answered. A distorted voice, low and deliberate, spoke through the static. "You shouldn't be here. Leave now. You have no idea what you've uncovered." The call ended abruptly. My hands clenched around the device, my stomach twisting into knots. "Who was it?" Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone who doesn't want us here," I said, my mind racing. If they had my number, they knew who I was. If they knew who I was, they knew where I lived. And if they knew where I lived, then that meant... The sound of tires screeching above ground sent a jolt of terror through me. Rivera was already in motion, pulling out his gun and signaling for us to move. "We need to get out of here. Now." But something inside me rebelled against the idea of running. If they were already here, what difference would it make? We had to find out the truth before they erased it. "We're already caught in this," I said firmly. "We go forward." We reached the heavy door, its surface worn and pockmarked with age. A single word, barely legible, had been stenciled onto the metal: vault. Rivera exchanged a wary glance with me before gripping the handle and pushing. The hinges groaned in protest, but the door gave way, revealing a vast chamber beyond. Our flashlights illuminated rows of filing cabinets, their labels marked with more Cyrillic script. At the far end of the room stood a desk, a dusty leather chair sitting behind it as if waiting for its occupant to return. Karen hesitated before stepping inside. "This is wrong," she muttered. "This shouldn't be here." Rivera moved toward the desk, his gun still drawn. "These files could tell us what this place really is." He reached for one of the cabinets and yanked it open, revealing folders packed tightly together. He grabbed the nearest one, flipping through its yellowed pages. His face darkened. "It's not just reports. These are medical records. And experiments." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "What kind of experiments?" He shook his head. "I don't know, but whatever they were doing here, it was never meant to be found." The sound of something shifting behind us made all three of us freeze. Karen's breath hitched. "That wasn't the wind, was it?" My heart pounded as I swung my flashlight toward the entrance. The corridor was empty, but the sense of being watched was suffocating. Rivera moved toward the door, shutting it quietly. "We need to go through these files quickly and leave before whoever's out there finds us." I nodded, grabbing a folder from the desk. The name on the front sent a jolt through me, Mikhail Petrov. I flipped through the pages, my pulse racing as I skimmed the information. He wasn't just some scientist, he had been the head researcher at this facility. And according to these records, he had vanished without a trace in 1987. No body. No explanation. Just gone. Karen moved closer, reading over my shoulder. "You think he's still here?" The idea made my skin crawl. Rivera muttered, "If he is, we don't want to meet him." Before I could respond, the light in the room flickered. A deep, electric hum filled the air, vibrating through the metal walls. Karen grabbed my arm. "We need to leave. Now." Rivera was already moving toward the door when the overhead lights that should have been dead decades ago, buzzed to life, flooding the room with a sickly yellow glow. "What the hell?" I started, but my voice died as the shadows in the corridor shifted. Not the way shadows should move. They pulsed, stretched, like something was pushing against them from the other side. A loud bang reverberated through the bunker. My breath caught. The door we had left open at the entrance was now shut. A lock clicked into place. Rivera cursed, yanking at the handle. "We're locked in." The air grew heavier. The static from my phone returned, crackling through the dead signal. A voice whispered through the interference. "You should not have come here." Karen's face turned pale. "Who was that?" I didn't answer, because I knew, deep in my bones, that whoever, or whatever, had spoken wasn't on the other end of the line. We weren't alone in this bunker. And whatever was here didn't want us to leave. As Rivera, Karen, and I moved cautiously through the tunnel, we began to notice the remnants of an abandoned facility. Rusted equipment, faded Soviet insignia, and outdated technology that hadn't been touched in decades. The further we went, the more evident it became that this was not just a simple bunker. Old Russian documents, maps, and diagrams lined a series of metal shelves, hinting at something far more significant. The air grew colder, heavier with the weight of history and secrecy. Rivera stopped abruptly, shining his flashlight on a door with Cyrillic lettering. He muttered, "Restricted zone." The realization settled over us. We had stumbled upon something classified, something that had been hidden away for a reason. Just as we debated whether to press forward, a sound sent chills through my spine, the distinct clatter of boots on metal flooring. We weren't alone. Rivera motioned for silence as we pressed ourselves against the wall, barely daring to breathe. A beam of light swept through the corridor, followed by the muffled voices of men speaking Russian. Karen's grip tightened on my arm, her body trembling. "They knew we were coming," she whispered, barely audible. My mind raced. How had they responded so quickly? Was it the SUVs? Had they been monitoring my house this whole time? The realization was sobering. We were walking straight into a hornet's nest, and there was no turning back. Before we could retreat, the voices grew louder, and then, an order barked in Russian. A flashlight beam locked onto us, and suddenly, we were blinded. A man commanded, "Freeze!" Rivera, ever the professional, raised his hand slowly, signaling compliance. I followed his lead, though every fiber of my being screamed to run. The men stepped forward, their weapons raised, not standard military issue, but something far more sophisticated. These weren't just relics of the past, they were active operatives. "Who are you?" one of them demanded in accented English. "How did you find this place?" I hesitated. Telling the truth felt like a mistake, but lying seemed even worse. Before I could answer, Karen, her voice quivering, blurted out, "We didn't mean to come here. We found it by accident." One of the men exchanged glances with the others. He wasn't convinced. Before the situation could escalate further, Rivera acted. With a single swift motion, he grabbed my arm and whispered, "Run!" The gunfire erupted a split second later, echoing down the narrow corridor. We dove for cover behind an old crate as bullets ricocheted off the walls. Karen screamed as I pulled her down, shielding her from the chaos. Rivera fired back, his shots precise, calculated. "We need to get out now," he yelled. I nodded, my heart pounding as we darted for an alternate passage, hoping it led back to the surface. The air was thick with dust and gunpowder as we sprinted through the dimly lit tunnel. I could hear our pursuers closing in, their boots slamming against the metal flooring. If we didn't find a way out soon, we weren't going to make it. Just when it seemed like we were cornered, we burst through a rusted doorway, emerging into the cool night air. I gasped for breath, my hands shaking as I helped Karen to her feet. Rivera was the last to exit, slamming the door shut behind him. We didn't stop running until we reached my house, locking the doors behind us. Silence filled the room, the weight of what we had just experienced pressing down on us. "We were never supposed to find that place," Rivera muttered, staring out the window. "And they're not going to let us walk away so easily." Karen sat down, her face pale. "So what do we do now?" I swallowed hard, my mind still reeling. There was only one answer. We find out the truth, before they find us again.